Right now, somewhere in your kitchen, there is something sweet within arm's reach. You know it before you even look. Your brain flagged it the moment you walked in the room. That pull you feel toward sugar isn't weakness. It isn't a modern flaw in your willpower. It's a signal that's been running in your body for millions of years, long before there were kitchens, long before there was sugar in a bag, long before there was even a word for sweet. So when did that signal turn on? When did a human being first put something in their mouth and feel that unmistakable rush of pleasure? The answer starts far earlier than you think, and it has almost nothing to do with dessert. Your ancestors weren't looking for a treat. They were looking for a way to survive the next 10 minutes. Sweetness, to an early primate moving through a forest canopy millions of years ago, wasn't a flavor. It was a piece of information. It meant this thing has sugar in it, and sugar means fast, usable energy. In a world with no refrigerators, no stored grain, no guaranteed next meal, an animal that could instantly recognize high-calorie food had an enormous advantage over one that couldn't. Your tongue didn't evolve to make birthday cake taste good. It evolved to make ripe fruit impossible to ignore. The receptors responsible for this are almost absurdly ancient. Deep in your DNA sits a gene pair called TAS1R2 and TAS1R3, which together build the sweet taste receptor sitting on your tongue right now. Researchers like Charles Zucker, who has spent decades mapping how taste actually works at the level of genes and neurons, have shown that this receptor isn't unique to humans at all. Versions of it show up across the primate family tree, tuned slightly differently in each species depending on what that species needed to eat to survive. Some monkeys that live almost entirely on unripe, low-sugar leaves have a version of the receptor that's far less sensitive than yours. You, on the other hand, carry a version built by ancestors who needed to find every scrap of sugar they possibly could. Think about what that means. Before there was a you, there was a lineage of primates walking through forests, and the ones who happened to notice sweetness faster, who could distinguish a ripe fig from an unripe one at a glance or a sniff or a single taste, were the ones who ate more calories, survived leaner seasons, and had more offspring. Generation after generation, that sensitivity got sharpened. It wasn't a decision. It was selection, blind and relentless, favoring anyone whose brain lit up hardest at the taste of sugar. You are, quite literally, descended from the pickiest, sweet-obsessed survivors of an ancient forest. Doesn't that put a strange spin on craving a candy bar at 9 p.m.? It didn't stop at taste. Your eyes are part of this story too. Dartmouth anthropologist Nathaniel Dominy has studied how certain primates, including the ancestors of humans, evolved a specific kind of color vision built around detecting red and orange against a background of green leaves. That's not a coincidence. Ripe fruit tends to turn red, orange, or yellow, while unripe fruit stays green and blends into the foliage around it. A primate that could spot a single orange fruit in a wall of green from a distance had a real edge over one that couldn't. So the pull toward sweetness wasn't confined to your tongue. It rewired your eyes as well, turning your entire visual system into a kind of early warning system for sugar. Even now, notice how a bowl of bright red strawberries or a golden mango practically jumps out at you on a table full of other food. That's not random. That's millions of years of forest instinct still running quietly in the background. Fire changed the equation again. Once early humans learned to cook, starchy foods like roots and tubers became something new entirely. Heat breaks down complex starch into simpler sugars, meaning a roasted root could deliver a burst of sweetness that its raw version never could. Suddenly, sweetness wasn't limited to a short fruiting season or a dangerous beehive. It could be coaxed out of the ground and made sweeter with nothing but a fire. That single shift quietly expanded how much sugar was available to the average human, long before anyone ever grew a stalk of sugarcane on purpose. But fruit was only the beginning. Somewhere along the way, humans discovered something even more concentrated, even more intoxicating than fruit. Honey. And honey didn't come easy. Getting it meant climbing a tree while a swarm of angry bees defended their home. Often meant getting stung dozens of times, sometimes meant real danger. And humans did it anyway over and over for tens of thousands of years. Why would anyone accept that kind of pain for a jar of sweetness? Anthropologist Alyssa Crittenden has spent years studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania whose diet still resembles, in many ways, the diet of ancient humans. Her research found that honey isn't a minor treat for the Hadza. During certain seasons, it can make up a huge share of their daily calories, rivaling meat as a primary food source. Hadza children are taught to follow a wild bird called the honey guide, which leads humans directly to beehives in exchange for a share of the wax and larvae left behind. That relationship between a bird and a human, built entirely around the pursuit of something sweet, may be tens of thousands of years old. It's one of the only known cases of wild animals and humans cooperating to find food together, and sugar is the reason it exists at all. This wasn't a passing habit either. Cave art in places like Cuevas de la Araña in Spain shows a human figure climbing a rope up a cliff face, surrounded by swarming bees, reaching toward a wild hive. That painting is thousands of years old, and it tells you something remarkable. Honey hunting was important enough, common enough, and dangerous enough that someone felt compelled to paint it on a rock wall for future generations to see. Archaeological residue analysis on ancient pottery across parts of Europe and Africa has turned up traces of beeswax dating back thousands of years, suggesting people weren't just eating honey occasionally. They were actively managing and harvesting it as a regular part of life, long before anyone had ever heard of a honeybee farm. Why go to all that trouble? Because for most of human history, honey was the single most concentrated source of sugar available anywhere in nature, far sweeter than any fruit. A body wired to chase quick calories had no reason to resist that kind of reward, even with the risk of 100 stings attached to it. Here's where the story gets stranger. Your very first experience with sweetness didn't come from fruit, and it didn't come from honey. It came before you could even see clearly, before you had teeth, before you could hold your own head up. Came from milk. Human breast milk is noticeably sweeter than the milk of almost any other mammal, carrying a sugar called lactose in higher concentrations than you'd expect. Infants are born already wired to prefer sweet tastes over every other flavor, showing a clear preference for sugar water over plain water within hours of birth. That preference isn't taught. It's already running the moment you take your first breath. So in a very real sense, the story of you and sweetness didn't begin with your first bite of fruit as a toddler. It began with your first swallow as a newborn, when sweetness meant only one thing. This is food. This is safe. Keep eating. Now here's the twist that changes everything. For nearly the entire span of human existence, sweetness was rare, seasonal, and hard to get. Fruit ripened for a few weeks a year. Honey required real risk. There was no year-round guarantee of sugar, which meant the human brain never had to evolve an off switch for sweet cravings, because nature was already rationing it. Your ancestors could gorge on sugar when they found it, because tomorrow it might be gone. That instinct, eat it now because it won't last, made perfect sense for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, in an evolutionary blink, everything changed. Sugar cane cultivation spread from New Guinea through Asia and eventually into the Mediterranean world, and by the height of European colonial trade, sugar had gone from an occasional forest treasure to a mass-produced commodity shipped by the ton. Harvard anthropologist Richard Wrangham, known for his research into how cooking transformed the human diet and brain, has pointed out how radically processed and concentrated modern food has become compared to anything our bodies evolved to expect. A piece of wild fruit might contain a modest amount of natural sugar wrapped in fiber that slows its absorption. A can of soda delivers a jolt of concentrated sugar with none of that fiber, none of that natural pacing, straight into a bloodstream that reacts exactly the way it did when your ancestors found a beehive. This is valuable, take as much as you can, right now. Your brain, in other words, never got the memo that the world changed. It's still running software built for scarcity in a world that now hands you sweetness on every street corner, in every checkout line, in every vending machine. That craving you feel isn't a personal failing. It's an instinct thousands of generations old, meeting an environment it was never designed for. And this is where the mirror comes in, because it isn't only about food. That same ancient wiring, built to chase anything that offers a quick reward, shows up everywhere in modern life. Notice how a notification on your phone gives you a tiny hit of pleasure the same way a piece of fruit once did. Notice how easy it is to reach for just one more scroll, one more video, one more small hit of something engineered to feel good fast. The mechanism underneath is strikingly similar. A brain built to reward anything that looks like fast, concentrated value, unable to distinguish between a beehive and a smartphone screen. Food companies figured this out long before neuroscientists put a name to it. Snack and beverage engineers talk about something called the bliss point, the exact combination of sugar, salt, and fat that maximizes how much your brain wants more without ever feeling fully satisfied. That's not an accident of good cooking. It's an industry-wide science built directly on top of the same ancient reward circuitry that once helped your ancestors find a ripe fig in a green forest. The beehive didn't chase you down. The soda aisle does. And it isn't only sugar that exploits this old machinery. Every time an app is designed to be sticky, every time a game rewards you with a satisfying little chime for completing a task, every time a street counter nags you not to break the chain, someone has borrowed the exact same evolutionary trick your ancestors' brains used on wild fruit. The packaging changed. The wiring underneath didn't. So the next time you catch yourself reaching for something sweet without even thinking about it, remember what you're actually reaching across. You're reaching across millions of years, past every ancestor who ever climbed a tree for fruit, past every hunter-gatherer who braved a swarm of bees for honey, past your own first sweet taste as a newborn who didn't yet have words for anything at all. That pull isn't new. It's ancient, it's inherited, and it's been shaping the choices of every human who ever lived. So the real question was never why you crave something sweet. The real question is what else in your life is quietly pulling on that very same ancient string. If you liked the video, please like, share, and comment.